Hello everybody, my name is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com, and I wanted to talk about the Trump healthcare executive order. Essentially what happened is that President Trump has said that he orders all the members of his cabinet to do whatever they can, whatever's within their power, to free up the healthcare market. While I'm a big free market proponent, and the sentiment I appreciate, there's some really big flaws in this approach. Now, first off, there's a limit to what is within the power of the cabinet. And mostly it's going to be like within the director of or the Secretary of Health and Human Services. They may be able to free up what kind of health insurance plans can exist, and issue some waivers and not enforce the mandate. The problem is, what happens years down the road? That's the problem with an executive order. It doesn't really provide any kind of certainty. Because if you don't enforce the mandate now, and let's say I just decide not to have health insurance and not have health insurance for the next several years, when a new president comes in, so let's say the Democrats win in 2020 and you have a new president come in and they go back to enforcing the mandate, are they going to go back for all those years prior? Because technically you still legally owed that money. If you had to pay the penalty, you still legally owed it even if it wasn't enforced. So a later president can be like, oh, well, here's a place where we can generate a bunch of revenue. And we kind of saw this under the Obama administration when the IRS started going after mispayments for Social Security that occurred generations ago. So basically, maybe your grandparents received too much Social Security and now they were going after you for it. That actually happened. Or people who got too much aid from FEMA, because in the mix of Sandy relief, some people may have gotten too much and then they went after them for it, and these were disabled people. So you create this sort of uncertainty in this sense. Okay, so that's why I don't like executive orders, because while the policy effect may or may not be good, whatever put into place can take it right out right away. The thing with the legislative process, it's a little bit more deliberative, but once it's there, it's harder to get rid of a good idea, but also means it's harder to get rid of a bad idea, which is why less should be solved through legislation. Legislation should oftentimes be a last-ditch effort. The problem is, so much has already been done by legislation. A lot of the answers just come in sort of peeling back a lot of those controls, which is exactly what's the problem with healthcare. If you haven't read the book, The Problem with Prescription, I highly recommend that book, which goes into a lot more detail than I'm going to, as far as what the problems of healthcare are. But the bottom line is this: there's a disconnection from the consumer to the healthcare provider. Now, generally, any type of provider of any good or service you have basically designs their business around the person who decides to pay. You decide to buy McDonald's, so McDonald's tries to make your experience better by making the food more likable, the lines shorter when possible. Now again, your experiences may or may not be different than that, but the idea is that every business, its goal is to try to make the experience better, and give you a better price point, so that way you will choose them more over the alternatives. You don't have that in healthcare because you don't choose to pay. You don't choose who you provide. You don't choose who you go to, because at the end of the day, really, it's your insurance company that pays, and you don't even choose your insurance company. Your employer does. So insurance companies cater to your employer, and your doctor and other labs, all these healthcare providers cater to your insurance company. They rather spend the extra time to make sure they get the documentation right for the health insurance company than spending an extra 10 minutes reviewing you and your condition. Why? Because again, you're not the person paying. That's why you need a more consumer-oriented market. Other people want to replace, your employer and your insurance company with government, but that doesn't change the incentive. It now just changes that now your doctor, your lab, now they're catering to the government's rules as far as getting paid, but they're still not catering to you. And that's the goal. Okay? So one may make the argument that the government may be marginally better than basically going through your employer, through a health insurance company. But ideally, you are in the driver's seat. Ideally, you make the choices, so that way people have a reason to cater to you. And that would go a long way. There's also the whole issue with the FDA system and how that kind of really shrinks the ability for innovation to occur and the cost of medication. There's our intellectual property rules. that also slow down that process for there to be alternatives, competition in the market, etc. So these are all things that need to be looked at. And none of that can really be addressed through an executive order. So when we're talking about like a free market for healthcare, it's difficult to just do that through an executive order. I'm all for it. And then again, dealing with an interstate healthcare market is also very difficult because of just the way the Constitution's set up and the difference between state and federal. There's not much the federal government can do to force that. That's really something that has to happen, has to be sort of coordinated by the states. Because a lot of that is sort of controlled and prevented to be interstate, so that way it sticks within the state's realm. So there's all these sort of mechanisms that this executive order won't address. They want to try to address it, but I think they're going to find that their ability to is limited. And the problem with that is everyone's going to think whatever the result is, that's the free market for healthcare. And it's not going to get anywhere close to that. And then everyone's going to be like, well, see, it didn't work, and that was the free market solution, so free markets don't work. But all you did was have something that was not even close, that was only free market in name. And that's the problem with a lot of times when people criticize the free market, is they point to things that people use the rhetoric, but what was happening was anything but. And to be fair, this doesn't just happen to free market solutions, it happens to solutions of all categories. So granted, even people who are for more government-oriented solutions, people will criticize government solutions by pointing to things that may not necessarily be what they were proposing, what they would ideally want. Because that's what government gives you. It gives you some sort of compromise. Oftentimes, you don't get the best of all worlds, or you don't get the best solution. You get the worst of all worlds when it's a government legislative solution, because that's just the nature of politics. That's just generally why I want politics to be the last place you go for answers. So that's my thoughts. My name is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com. Have a great day and enjoy.